So please welcome Lauren Plunk. She is the watershed manager for North Texas Municipal Water District. With over a decade of experience in water resources, engineering, and regulatory compliance, Lauren brings a diverse background as a consultant, a municipal engineer, a corporate environmental manager. She's also a former high school engineer teacher and holds both professional engineer and secondary teacher licenses in Texas, along with the BS and MS degrees in environmental engineering from SNU. She can do it all. So
funny. Thank you.
But on a personal note, I want you guys to know I've worked with Lauren out in the field. She has an amazing stream trailer, and she is amazing to work with. So I hope you guys all get that opportunity.
Thank you. All right, thank you for the introduction. So I am going to start out by telling you that I am a water nerd. My husband tells me all the time when I start talking about water, he'll eventually say splash, splash. That's the clue that I've talked about it a little bit too much, or I am saying something in a way that doesn't make sense to him. And he's an electrical engineer, so I say spark, spark when he does the same thing to me. So today I'm going to be talking about the Lavon Watershed story, which goes back decades, really. Because I like to be a little cutesy in my presentations, everything about Lavon could not be covered in a single presentation. I am going to stay very high level, and I know this group is probably going to have a lot more detailed questions, so please know I'm available for questions whenever you have them. All right, so chapter 1 of this is really talking about the journey of a raindrop to Lavon Lake, how that water gets there. Chapter 2 is what happens once it gets into Lavon and how it gets into our homes and beyond. And then chapter 3 is what we're planning for, which is the future and what we can do to impact change in the future. And that's where everyone in this room and everyone in this county and even beyond come into the picture. Chapter 4, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Lavon Lake Watershed Protection Plan and what its purpose and intent is. And then chapter 5 is when we talk about local implementation, and a lot of people in this room, whether or not you realize it, are part of my implementation team, right? So welcome, you've been recruited, whether you like it or not. And then because I am a former teacher, I am ending this up with an assessment. It's going to be in the form of watershed jeopardy. It's not going to be the exact Alex Trebek rules. There's some modifications that the folks at home can still play. But there are multiple Alex Trebek heads throughout my presentation. And that is a clue that what I am saying about that point is probably going to come up in the assessment at the end. Just so everybody knows, I have 5 Love Lavon Lake bags as giveaways for incentives with some stickers and all sorts of things in here. And then my grand prize, and if this size does not work for you, I will get you a size that does, but is a Lavon Lake cleanup t-shirt. So yes, this is what you're competing for in Watershed Jeopardy. All right. So the journey to Lavon, how a single raindrop gets into Lavon Lake is what we're going to be talking about first. I know this room in particular has a lot of people that already know what the term watershed means. It can be explained many ways, but no, it's not a shed that holds water, right? It is essentially defined by topography, and there is what is called a divide going along the outside rim of the watershed, and then the lowest point, it's kind of like a bowl. The lowest point is where all the water collects, and in the case of Lavon Lake, it is Lavon Lake, right? I love this quote from LBJ, so you'll notice my friend right here. So saving the water in the soil must start where the first raindrop falls. That is very true, because as that raindrop falls anywhere within our watershed, it has the potential to pick up pollutants, sediment, all sorts of things. And those things will go with the water to the lowest point in the watershed. This is the Lavon Lake watershed, which is huge. Does anyone in this room kind of know that it's almost 800 square miles? It encompasses a lot of Collin County, but we even get into Grayson, Fannin, and Hunt counties. So any drop of water that falls within this huge geographic area has the potential to eventually end up in Lavon Lake, which is the primary drinking water source for over 2.3 million people. And that is why watershed protection is incredibly important to everyone in our community. All right. So now that we've kind of talked about how that raindrop makes its way into Lavon, I want to take a second to talk about what me and my colleagues do. There's a lot of people that work very, very hard. I was talking about unsung heroes earlier. The water treatment plant operators are definitely that. They're 24/7, 365-day operations. So I want to kind of give you a glimpse into what they do for a living. North Texas Municipal Water District was formed when all of the communities in our area were very, very small. I was talking to somebody in the audience earlier that lived in Plano when there were how many people that lived there? Where'd she go? 7,000 people, right? Which is incredible to think about. So all of our member cities basically said, look, we are all small towns and we want to have water service. We need to band together to figure out how to make that possible and economical for our communities. Now, we were created by the Texas legislature in the early 50s. In 1953, Lavon Lake was completed by the Army Corps of Engineers. They are who own Alex Trebek. They're who own and operate the lake, and we are in a partnership with them. We began providing treated water to member cities in 1956. Then we expanded into the wastewater and solid waste realms in the 70s and 80s, respectively. All right. Again, I already kind of mentioned we serve, last count, over 2.3 million people in a 2,200 square mile service area. So you'll notice back here, we were talking about Lavon's watershed. It's about 800 square miles. And we are serving 2,200 square miles in some form or fashion. So a huge population of folks have a reliance upon Lavon Lake. We have 7 water treatment plants. 4 of them are located in Wiley, which is one of the largest water treatment plants in the entire country. Little known fact. And then the other 3 are at Tawakoni, Bonham, and adjacent to Bodark Lake, which is the newest reservoir in the state of Texas. We also have 13 wastewater treatment plants. And then on the solid waste side of the house, we have 3 transfer stations that do up to 4,100 tons of solid waste per day. So these are the services that all of my coworkers provide to the community. I am not on the treatment side of the house, but I wanted to take at least 30 seconds to talk about water treatment because we get a lot of questions about that. So when we are taking water from the lake or the pump station, it goes to our treatment plants. And the first step is to mix that lake water with something that is called ferric sulfate. And that kind of removes sediment and dirt and kind of clumps it together. The best analogy I can have is if you've been in a hot tub and there's a lot of people with sunscreen and you start to see like those flock particles floating on the top. That's kind of what ferric does. And it allows that clean water to stay on top and those particles drop to the bottom. And then we have primary disinfection with ozone treatment, secondary disinfection using chlorine, and then a filtration process in the very last step. From that point on, the clean water gets distributed to the cities, and there's some residual that stays in the water to keep it clean as it moves through the pipes. Again, this is another diagram just kind of showing the same thing, but after that water droplet makes its way to Lavon, goes to the pump stations, goes to the plant, our lab folks are another kind of unsung hero. They test so much water. to make sure that it's safe for the community, and then it's piped to our member and customer cities. All right. Oh gosh, Alex is back again. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. This is a very complex map, but what is in this kind of gray area is our service area. So we've got lots of Collin County, we've got a little bit of Dallas County, Rockwall, some of Kaufman, and then we've got some more over here in Hunt. So we pull water into Lavon Lake from several places. We used to import water from Lake Texoma directly into Lavon Lake. That operation ceased because of zebra mussels, if you heard about those. And so now that water from Lake Texoma goes directly to our Wiley treatment plant, and it gets blended with Lavon water there. Now, Lake Chapman, which is way over here, that water gets pumped into Lavon Lake. So it gets mixed in the lake itself. There's some Tawakoni water that does the same. And then who here has been to the East Fork Reuse Project or John Bunker Sands wetland? Okay, perfect. So that water is down here and it gets pumped all the way into Lavon Lake as well. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but that treatment wetland is really essential to our operation because it removes nitrogen and phosphorus. We don't want additional nitrogen and phosphorus in Lavon Lake because of algal blooms, right? So it has a really critical role in our water system. We have the potential to treat almost 936 million gallons of water per day, which I know sounds like a huge number, but it is actually a huge number. It is a very large treatment plant, and you can kind of see that when you compare Tawakoni's treatment plant's only 30, right? And Bonham's is only 6. So the city of Bonham is served by that 6 million gallons. And then our newest treatment plant is about 70 currently, and that source is Bodark Lake, way up there. Okay, so that's where all the water is coming from. In a very, very quick summary, I find this fascinating. My husband would probably be doing splash splash by now, but I don't think most people that drink the water from Lavon have a realization all of the different lakes that are kind of at play. All right. Another question I get a lot, and it's related to watershed, but not exactly related, is I get, how do we plan for having enough water in the future? How do we plan for flooding? And then how do we plan for water quality? So that last arena is my house. The first two I'm going to just mention because people are curious about them, but not necessarily my wheelhouse. So on the water quantity side, so way back when George W. Bush was governor in Texas, so late 90s, that's when the Texas state water planning process got going. There was a realization that, hey, we can't start planning for things 5 or 10 years out. We have to have a very long planning horizon. And that's exactly what happened. 16 regions throughout the state were formed. We are in Region C. If anyone's interested in that, there's no Alex on this slide, so don't have to remember that. We plan on a 50-year planning horizon. So very, very long ways out because these things take a very long amount of time to plan, engineer, permit, build. We look at population and water projections. We look at what we currently have and what we are going to need. And then we recommend a set of strategies. For all my math people in the room, I've got a graph, and I'm not going to expect you to memorize this either, but it has our supplies in North Texas Municipal Water District in that county area I showed you. It also has Tarrant Regional, which is our friends on the Fort Worth side of the house, and the Dallas supply. So basically everything in the Metroplex. These bars are the supply. So these bars are the supply in 2030, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. And these lines going across the top of the screen are what the projected demands are going to be based on population projections. So you will notice that in between the bars and the lines, there's some white space, right? And that's an opportunity for us to plan for the future. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you, this is our pie chart specific to North Texas Municipal Water District. So our current supplies are up here. And then we have conservation and reuse, which is almost a third of the pie. It's really important to say that no individual strategy is going to solve the growth, right? It is a combination of strategies that are important. So about third from reuse, about 22% under connect existing, which means we've got some water, but we don't have a way to get it to us yet. And we're going to make that happen through projects. And then the new reservoir percentage is 28. So we're basically doing everything we can to ensure that we're prepared for the growth in the future. But conservation and reuse are essential. We cannot do it without those two things. Which leads me to what I mentioned earlier, our treatment wetlands. So back when I said we treat over 900 million gallons a day potentially in Wiley, the treatment plant the East Fork wetland was designed for 90 million. So about 10% of our peak demand can come from this incredible 1,800 acre wetland. So I talked earlier about how that droplet of water falls from the sky, gets collected in the lake, eventually goes, to your house. And then when I talk to little kids, they love to talk about this part of it after you drink that water, right? Where does it go? And our friends on the wastewater side of the house do a great job treating that water. And eventually, after it's treated, it goes back into watersheds to be collected again. So the East Fork wetland, we have a water right from the state of Texas to withdraw that water downstream of Dallas. That's why the wetland is located where it is. And we're using gravity to our advantage. And then we're pulling that water out of the East Fork and some water from the main stem of the Trinity, putting it through the wetland. And does anybody remember where it's going back up to after it's gone through the wetland? Lavon Lake. You guys are going to rock this Jeopardy quiz. Okay, 3.5 miles all the way back up to Lavon Lake. So I've got our bald eagles and our education center over here. And this is such a huge critical education piece for our community. But behind all of that really, really cool stuff is the water nerd stuff, right? Where we are removing nitrogen and phosphorus and taking it back to Lavon Lake for reuse. Those of you in the room that are very interested in conservation, I have a peer that works on the conservation side. His name is Ted Pick. You might have met him before. This is his slide. I wanted to kind of talk real briefly about his initiatives for this year because we talked about reuse and conservation being such a huge piece of the pie. So this year, they are working on some really neat initiatives. They're upping their outreach to HOAs. They're doing an irrigation evaluation program pilot right now where they'll come out and do an irrigation evaluation and save you water in your home. That's for a couple of cities in the area. They're hoping to expand it. It's a pilot program. They're looking at refreshing our education programs. They're doing kind of a visioning project on conservation to help better define our messaging. Lots of really, really critical things. Those irrigation evaluations, they've already done 600-ish, and they found about 59 million gallons saved annually through those irrigation repairs. So they're doing some really fascinating, great work. If you ever wanted him to come out and talk to you, he'd be more than happy to. And I have a QR code up to his website if you're interested in that. And not just him, there's several other people that work on that team. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so educating HOAs obviously have a lot of green space, right? And educating HOAs about their irrigation and land use management practices and things like that, because they are kind of what you get big bang for your buck on in terms of irrigation water. That's why there's fewer voices to talk to for a bigger defined kind of benefit. That typically is a city type issue, but we work in very close partnership with the cities. So that's definitely an area of interest and potential for growth. So that's kind of why they started to study that a little bit more this year. And I can have them follow up with you on the details of that too, if you're interested. Yes. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. It was a question that I think is having to do, was it through fire hydrants? Okay, through fire hydrant flushing in the summertime. And that is actually water quality management initiative through our distribution system to kind of get in the summer months, right? There is a component that in those like dead end lines where we don't want that water to be stagnant. And so we will have flushing programs that are very targeted. And they dechlorinate the water before they put them into the storm drain. Okay. And that's kind of what the intention of that is. It's a relatively small volume relative to the big piece of the pie. And there's some other things that are in process, that can be done, but that's probably what you're seeing is their flushing program. Okay. This one is the one that we are not very involved with in terms of what our mission is as a drinking water provider. And you'll see Alex here. I mentioned that the Army Corps of Engineers built and maintains Lavon Lake, but it was actually originally built for flood control without drinking water kind of as a mission. We came on a little bit afterwards and we actually raised up the level of water that could be held. But there's been a lot of questions about flooding lately. The state started to have a flooding planning, much like the quantity planning side of the house. They broke the state up into 15 regions this time instead of 16. And ours in this area is Region 3, which is the Trinity Regional Flood Planning Group. It's also on a 5-year cycle for updates, and it's a 30-year planning horizon. And a bunch of projects that can help prevent flooding go into this book or report, and that helps get funding and those sort of mechanisms in place. So I'm not very involved in this, but there's always a lot of questions about it. So I went ahead and added a slide for this to let everybody know. Okay, that leads me to my house. So I am interested in water quality planning. So the watershed planning process is locally driven, involves a lot of groups and people, and is intended to be a unified approach. When we go back to that Lavon Lake watershed map, it crossed county boundaries, city boundaries, there are so many different groups of people that are involved in watershed planning. It's not enough to just say, hey, city of Blake, go take care of this, right? We needed something a little bit larger. And that's what watershed protection planning does. And so we look for activities and projects based upon technical merit and benefits to the community. And we have a coordinated public education and outreach program. Our goals are kind of twofold. One, anything that is impaired is something that we are wanting to restore. And I'll talk about what impairment means here in a little bit. And then we want to protect unimpaired water bodies from future pollution threats. All right, so what does that mean? When we go back to that Lavon Lake watershed map I had up at the beginning, and we talked about how that droplet, as it collects through our watershed, it can pick up other things along with it, right? That's really what we're talking about. And watershed protection planning is incredibly complex, right? What we refer to as point sources are what you can point to. Like, I know you have a factory here that is discharging into the creek. That's not to say that that's not important, but those are pretty heavily regulated and we know exactly where they are. What is more difficult to impact is the non-point sources, meaning you can't point to a specific source, but it kind of involves all of us, right? So non-point sources result from runoff from the land. It can be the dripping oil car on the road. It can be the person that over fertilizes their yard, which is I've heard figures of 10 times over fertilization is a pretty standard number. It can be, and this is one that I work out at my house, right? Who has dogs in this room? Like, we're a lot of dog lovers in the room, and I think everybody gets the concept that if you're walking your dog and they go to the bathroom, you need to pick it up. Where kind of the disconnect can be is in your own backyard, right? People think, yeah, it's extra fertilizer. Nope. It runs off just like everything else. And so bacteria in urban areas often originates from dogs in people's backyards. So picking up dog waste is very critical. Land use. So when we transition from pervious to impervious surfaces, meaning like farm, agricultural land to a parking lot, right? That water runs off a lot faster. There's a whole lot of contributions and factors that go into what happened in our watersheds. And again, I'm trying to stay up here because this is an encyclopedia worth of information. But there's a whole lot of factors that go into water quality in our watersheds. All right, which leads me to chapter 4, which is our Lavon Lake Watershed Protection Plan. So this was originally published in 2017, and even though Alex isn't on that slide, he's on another one by that date. The QR code is a link to it. If you Google Lavon Lake Watershed, it'll be the first hit. I do that all the time. This is a pretty lengthy plan, and it is approaching, eight-ish years old. So we'll probably be looking at renewing it here pretty soon because there's been a lot of change, wouldn't you agree, in Collin County since 2017. So kind of the history of the protection plan. So the 10-year water quality improvement goals are to reduce bacteria levels. So we have several impairments for recreational contact due to bacteria in the Lavon Watershed. And the stream team folks in the room, I know you know that. Appreciate everything you do. I'll say that at least 5 more times. We also want to reduce nutrient and sediment loading, even though that's not an impairment. I mentioned earlier, the wetland removes nitrogen and phosphorus, which AKA nutrients. We want to remove and prevent that because that can cause algal blooms and all sorts of unintended consequences. And then sediment loading is really important too for multiple reasons. The more sediment that is in a water body, the less what it can hold. Water, right? So that applies to our lake where we're concerned about how much drinking water we have. It also applies to creeks in our communities, right? So keeping sediment out of the watershed is also very critical. So kind of this all kicked off in 2010 when elevated E. coli bacteria levels were found to occur in the East Fork of the Trinity River and Wilson Creek. In 2016, we started the process to initiate the Watershed Protection Plan. We had a kickoff meeting, lots of meetings, water quality data, modeling, measurements, all the engineer water nerd stuff happened. And then in 2017, we completed the plan and it was accepted by the EPA, which created grant funding opportunities. I mentioned this earlier, but we kind of characterize the watershed, meaning what's going on, what does it look like, what's the water quality. Then we plan and get the plan in place. And then we're in the implementation phase right now, which means putting our plan into action, which is a huge undertaking. And that's why I will talk about this until I'm blue in the face. It's very important. And it's often facilitated through partnerships and grant funding. Okay. Real quickly, I did want to show you guys the water quality impairments that we have. It is these segments right here for bacteria. All of the red dots are sampling locations. So we have about 28 that we maintain throughout the watershed. And Again, although these are not impairments, nutrients, sediments, and other hazardous substances are things that we try to tackle in our management strategies. So those are the Alex's on the side of this slide. Soils, I know this will come as no surprise to the folks in this room, but the green is all the clay soils. The blues are the silty clays, various different types of clay soils in this area. And that has an impact on how much water gets absorbed and how water moves throughout the watershed. So that was an important part of the characterization to look at. And then this is kind of the one that's most fascinating to me, land use. So what I have on the screen is the red area is developed high intensity. So we think about Lavon Watershed as being urban, right? Because of where we all live, or most of us live. It is still predominantly by percentage a rural watershed because of all this area. That is obviously changing. So in 2001, the population of Lavon that was in Collin County was about 534,000, and it was 15% developed. In 2021, it was up to 1.1 million and about 16.3% developed. And I had those numbers pulled the other day, and we're getting closer to 20% developed. So there's a lot that is changing in the watershed throughout our planning horizon. So what do you mean by management measures? What does that mean? I have a lot of them on the screen right here, and the size of the circle does not imply the importance. But I have education and outreach kind of flashing, because essentially we're trying to get to anyone that lives, works, or engages in our watersheds and tell them what they can do to help out water quality. Some of the other things that were mentioned, we already talked about how the wetland helps water quality. Wildlife contributions, I saw some beautiful deer walking through earlier outside, and we talked about E. coli from dogs earlier, right? Wildlife has E. coli contributions also, right? So there's a management component to that, if you want to call it that. Volunteer programs, folks like me that are coordinating things in the watershed, wastewater, right? They're a portion of this too. They do a great job treating what we discharge, but there's always room for improvements when we're talking about public infrastructure, right? Land trust, I still see news articles that come across my desk from time to time about people that have dedicated their land to land trust to help kind of conserve and protect it. And then the urban component as well. So all the folks that work on stormwater in our cities, they do great work also, and they have a part in the management strategies as well. Am I splashing too much, or y'all still with me? Okay, cool. Just making sure. When we're talking about what like ag folks can do, and I've got some Trebeks here. The soil board has, if you're an agricultural person in the room, probably not too many of us, but there's a great manual that tells you all the things you can do on your land and very many resources. So we're talking about things like no-till farming and maintaining cover crops to prevent erosion. We are looking at the difference between these two pictures. Riparian area, sorry, a vocabulary term for the quiz later. You know, that basically when you hear the word riparian, that's where the land and the water meet, right? That transition zone. So right here, we have a lot of erosion and bare soil. Down here in this riparian area, we don't. And those riparian areas have a huge role to play in filtering pollutants, and that's why they're important. And then back to these cows, right? They're hanging out in the water, staying cool in a North Texas summer. But having strategies like fencing to limit where the cows can get into the water can really help keep that E. coli out of our watershed. So lots of Alex questions. And there are some resources that agricultural folks can take advantage of that open them up to grant funding for some of these conservation practices. So I wanted to mention that. On the urban BMP side, more Alex's are appearing. The number of people that think that water that goes down the storm drain gets treated before it goes into the environment is still pretty large. That does not happen. So anything that washes off of our property, off our sidewalks, off our street is going down that drain. And we've got an engineered bioswale right here that can help stop some of the solids and other pollutants from getting into the street. Got a pretty ugly oil sheen happening right here. And so pervious pavers or other things that cover the ground that have the ability to increase how much water goes into the ground are another example. Urban BMP. I know I live in Wiley, and the Dutch Bros, they have a pervious paving parking lot, which is really cool to see actually out happening in the community. And then last Alex for the day is rain catchment systems. This one is also at the City of Wiley Municipal Complex. Our city partners are great because they really help with a lot of these projects. They can increase the capacity to manage stormwater coming off of rooftops. And we actually have one at our headquarters building. If you ever want to see it, I'm happy to give you a tour. All right, you're with me. Chapter 5 is where local support and implementation comes in, and that's where the rubber meets the road. It really is. So what's been going on lately? We talked about grant funding. I'm in the process of applying for 2 new grants right now from the state for watershed implementation, but we're over $1 million of grant funding awarded. This is one of my colleagues. We do water quality monitoring at 28 sites within the watershed with support from Texas Stream Team. I said it again. Thank you so much for everything you do. Overall, we're talking about water quality involves thousands of constituents, right? We're very focused on bacteria and sediment and some of those, but overall, our water quality in Lavon Lake is good. We have 3 tributaries in the watershed that exceed the state criteria for bacteria for recreational use, right? When we're talking about drinking water, we've got disinfection, okay? So that's great, but we want to get that bacteria level down for recreational use. We're kind of trending downward in Wilson Creek and East Fork overall, and we're increasing in the Pilot Grove Creek. Now I've added this little Alex question down here. Trending downward is great. It looks like 33 and 49% reductions, what is required to meet recreational standards in those 2 creeks specifically. So trending downward is great, but that's, it's a large percentage that has to be reduced. Phosphorus levels are pretty flat. We don't see any other major significant trends in other analytes. This is a hot off the press statistic. I mentioned that ag land can get water quality management plans, and we have a technician in Collin County who writes those and works with ag producers. And she told me that we are up to 3,258 acres of agricultural land in Collin County that has a water quality management plan. So that's a really impressive number to me. And then I added you guys at the very end because I'm preaching to the choir when I come and talk to your chapters. You are vital in what you do in terms of training and support in many of the projects that you talk about at every chapter meeting. So some of these we saw tonight, right? The Collin College Prairie Restoration Project. This one is at Blackland Prairie Raptor Center. I got another Alex sighting there because that one is right by Lavon Lake. Super, super critical project because of its proximity to the lake. City of Wiley has one too. I took a headline, I think, with you guys working there, and that's not even all of them, right? There's a lot more, so thank you. This is kind of some old flyers that David had that shows some tree plantings that were done with support from the Water District and y'all and cities in the area. So those sorts of things make a difference. Here's my Texas Stream Team. So the Hamptons wave. This is one of their actual test results from last weekend? Yeah. So this is in Ticky Creek. This is a great, great program. You only have to be 14 years old. I literally took my 15-year-old to this and he had a blast. It's a statewide program. I think everyone in this room kind of knows what it is and knows about it, but we recently set up donating some supplies for chemicals for testing. They've got a state level email address to sign up for training, but I know a lot of people in this room, including this chapter, you don't even need to go to the state, right? They will get you hooked up on supporting this. But we talked about the 28 water quality sites that we monitor, right? We're on a regular schedule, and this kind of helps bridge the gap. We can't be everywhere at all the time, and that's where the community scientists come in. So thank you for the third or fourth time. I appreciate you. And then we mentioned that cisterns and rain catchment systems have an impact. We got an EPA grant for the city of McKinney and for our headquarters to put in both a rain garden and 2 bioretention basins. So these are the public outreach signs that are located at both. They just finished construction. And these are what they look like in reality. I will follow my sword and say that I am an engineer. And I like plants, I really do. And I have a keeple garden in my backyard. I'm trying my best, right? But it's like a bless her heart situation. So I survived the first summer in my rain garden. I've done some replantings in August and they survived. So I feel like that's a win. But this is really taking shape, and it's something that we want to be a demonstration for the future. All right, I know am I going over? Okay, I'm gonna go quicker. All right, stream trailer outreach. This is a tool that we can come out to take to folks. And don't worry, if we do not get through all of Watershed Jeopardy, I will when time is over, and we will still do the prizes. Do not worry. We can stop along the way. I know everybody wants t-shirts. All right. So either I can bring it out, and we have several folks in the room that are trained. Folks that are trained, yes. Yes, that's you guys. You guys can run it too without me as needed as well. And it's a great outreach tool to show watersheds. I think it's actually better for adults than kids even, right? Like, because they're the ones that can really make change. Key takeaways are that watershed protection planning is a non-regulatory approach to protect and improve water quality. Everyone is welcome at the table. Local stakeholders and partnerships like you guys live, work, interact with the watershed, right? You're a stakeholder. They're essential to success. We need you. North Texas kind of leads the efforts as the regional folk, but we need everyone in this room. Implementation projects can be leveraged with grant funding to help make them happen. I am constantly getting grant notifications, and having shovel-ready projects and ideas are things that I encourage. Please, if you have ideas, bring them to me. And it's going to be critical with all the growth that we're having in our area and the land use changes.